For the past couple of days, I've been collecting some stuff for this video in which I thought I'd get put some stuff up there for people looking for, for authors looking for ideas of stuff to work on. Like, if you find yourself suffering a mental block or unable to think straight, or you just can't, what's the word? You don't feel inspired, I guess. This video is for you. That, if you're just bored out of your mind and need something to listen to. In which case, there's this, which is a bunch of stuff to look at if you're looking for inspiration for a fantasy, science fiction. I would say paranormal, but I don't know if any of these apply. And then some other stuff. So here it goes. The Brothers Grimm, a collection of European stories gathered by the brothers Wilhelm and Jacob Grimm, or Jacob Grimm. Think fairy tales, but before Disney got their grubby mitts on them and sanitized the stories to asinine levels. Stuff like Hansel and Gretel or The Three Little Pigs. Not as much of a happily ever after. Cyberpunk 2020 by Mike Pondsmith. Like Cyberpunk in general, because there have been other versions of them been made. A decent science fiction RPG similar to Dungeons and Dragons, but in a science fiction form. Actually has some tenets to it. Style over substance. Attitude is everything. Always take it on to the edge and break the rules. And the main reason I recommend this is because if you've seen the game, you kind of get the gist of what I'm saying. That it's something you should definitely be taking inspiration from if you're a science fiction guy. Or at least I would go to that if you're looking for ideas to make your own version of. Another one is Dungeons and Dragons. Now, you'll probably be laughing about this one, but believe it or not, a few good fantasy mangas were made with inspiration from this tabletop game, like Goblin Slayer as the prime example. If anything, this is a good place to take inspiration for the type of enemies and character classifications you want in the story, like Spell Sword, Battle Mage, Warrior. Personally, a Spell Sword's become my favorite at this point. Influences in pop culture of the Dungeons and Dragons would be... Actually, these are also some things I'd recommend reading if you need some more inspiration. Goblin Slayer Year One, and The Devil's a Part-Timer. Next, we have H.P. Lovecraft. Now, fair warning, when you start reading, to paraphrase Neil Gaiman, it can be hard to read him at times. I have that problem with reading his stories, but the concepts are just so damn interesting. Personally, I think the man himself is infinitely more fascinating than his creations. And for those of you interested in learning more, there's a pretty good documentary about him called Fear the Unknown, as well as two good books, a biography called I Am Providence and A Means to Freedom, which is a collection of letters exchanged between him and Robert E. Howard. His genre was cosmic horror, a kind of science fiction, and some elements of supernatural horror. Some examples of the works he made were At the Mountains of Madness. There are fragments of a story called Azathoth, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, The Call of Cthulhu, The Color Out of Space, Dagon, The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, The Dunwich Whore, The Nameless City, Nyarlathotep, The Outsider, The Rats in the Walls, The Shadow Out of Time, The Shadow of Innsmouth, and The Whisper in Darkness. And his legacy, to put it bluntly, is, where do I even start? I'd say his legacy is the most prominent in the horror genre of movies, not counting his adaptations of his work. You had stuff like Alien, Hellboy, The Thing, and Evil Dead. There's also some presence of his in video games like The Call of Cthulhu and Bloodborne, the tabletop games. TV shows like Warehouse 13 have made reference to him. There have been songs influenced by him by like Behind the Wall of Sleep by Black Sabbath, Call of Cthulhu by Metallica, Cthulhu Dawn by Cradle of Filth, Rite of Cthulhu by Samael, Dunwich by Electric Wizard, the music of Erich Zahn by Mekong Delta, Stranger Aeons by Entombed, Lovecraft's Death by Septic Flesh, and Shackled to the Trillionth of Cthulhu. And I forgot to put where that was made by, who that was made by. He also has had an influence on works by other authors, such as Neil Gaiman, who As far as I know, he did one short story about the old ones complaining about Lovecraft. That was it. But he has had an influence on other writers like Stephen King. So that's another one. Next is J.R.R. Tolkien, and these recommendations should be simple: The Hobbit, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, The Return of the King, The Silmarillion, published posthumously by Tolkien's son, Christopher. Next is The Kalevala, which I think I might get around to doing a video just going full into this one. But basically it's a Finnish myth, an epic. Well, not an epic, but it has a creation myth. It has lots of good characters in it. And I finally gotten to the part of it I've been looking forward to, which is the Tale of Kullervo, which is the inspiration for Elric and Melna Benet. But it has a Finnish creation myth and various characters such as Kullervo for you to take inspiration from. It's inspired works such as the Elric saga, as I already mentioned, and Lord of the Rings was another one. Although I see more of a similarity in the Silmarillion than in the Lord of the Rings series. Because the Silmarillion is basically the Bible meets the Kalevala meets the Volsunga saga. Next we have Michael Moorcock. He wrote the Elric saga, Elric and Melna Benet, The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, The Weird of the White Wolf or The White Wolf, The Sleeping Sorceress or The Vanishing Tower, The Bane of the Black Sword or The Song of the Black Sword, Stormbringer, Fortress of the Pearl, The Revenge of the Rose, The Return to Melna Benet, The Stealer of Souls, The Singing Citadel, The Jade Man's Eyes, Tales of the White Wolf, Dream Thief's Daughter, The White Wolf's Son. Excuse me. He also did a series called The Eternal Champions, which include The Eternal Champions, The Phoenix of Obsidian, The Swords of Heaven, The Flowers of Hell, The Dragon and the Sword, The Strailing Tree, The Road Between Worlds, Corum, The Coming of Chaos, Cain of Old Mars, Earl Albec, A Nomad of the Time Stream. And that ends that. Next is Robert E. Howard. This guy, he had 3 creations. Only 2 of them are really that known in popular culture. There was Kull, Conan the Barbarian, and Solomon Kane. Kull, as far as I know, has had a movie made about him. He might have, and I don't know. But as a reading recommendation, I would just get The Savage Tales of Solomon Kane. It should include stories such as The Red Shadows, The Skulls and the Stars, Rattle of Bones, The Moon of Skulls, Hills of the Dead, The Footfalls Within, Wings in the Night, Blades of the Brotherhood, The Right Hand of Doom. There were also fragment Solomon Kane stories, because Robert E. Howard, once he made Conan, he tapped that vein. He never stopped tapping it, but not without trying to make more Solomon Kanes. Their fragments remained from that he was working on before he killed himself. These fragments include Death's Black Rider, The Castle of the Devil, The Children of Ashur, Hawk of Basti. He also had some poems called The One Black Stain, The Return of Sir Richard Grenville, Solomon Kane's Homecoming. There was also a Conan the Barbarian complete collection, and Kull, The Exile of Atlantis. And unlike most of these other ones, I thought I'd do some influences based on his work. If you saw the Van Helsing movie, his look seems reminiscent of Solomon Kane. And I say the same thing of Vampire Hunter D. That look also looks very Solomon Kane. Bear in mind, I don't know for sure if this is true or not, if the people who created these things did that intentionally. That's just what I'm seeing. Conan the Barbarian influence would be He-Man. I mean, He-Man looked very pulpy from what little I've seen of it. It had a combination of fantasy and science fiction, and which was pretty good. Next, we have the Saga of Volsunga, a collection of Norse stories. Was the other half of the inspiration behind Lord of the Rings. And that's all I really wanted to say about that one. It was just, I found that a little interesting, because when you look at the history of some of these fantasy novels and find where the inspiration comes from, I find them to be also very insightful, as well as inspiration for newer stories. Next is Walter B. Gibson. He wrote The Shadow. Well, he didn't create The Shadow. At least I don't think he did, but he wrote a bunch of stories. and I have no idea how many were actually made by him. There were 334 Shadow stories made. Walter B. Gibson wrote a lot of them, like a large number of them. I think I heard he has the record for the longest record of words written by one person. And last we have the Ulster Cycle. It contains stories and I believe Irish mythology about a guy named, well, it has characters like Cuchulainn, whose life was one whirlwind of a disaster. And that's all for now. I might have to make an updated version of this at some point. And to any people who take umbrage with some of the things I've suggested, bite me. Yeah, that's all I can really say. Bite me and suck it, because I think these are interesting characters, and I mainly think people are going to give me shit over this if they're the oversensitive sort. And I'm recommending pulps because the pulps were made in the early 1900s, like post-World War I, and racial equity was not that great back then. But yeah, these are just some things I thought I would recommend. I was kind of bored, and I thought this would be interesting. Again, I might do an updated version of this in the future. And that's all for now. I hope you find something you can use in your stories with these. And that's all for now. Have a nice day. And remember, the game was rigged from the start.